the truth is, at every inflection point of our lives, we have a very strong risk of that feeling of awkwardness when we're trying to grow, when we're trying to change, when the world is changing and we're trying to keep up, trying to learn how to use AI, we're trying to figure out how to do hybrid work, everything feels awkward. And the truth is, we can't avoid it.
Welcome to It Gets Late Early. Today I have Henna Pryor. She is an author, a speaker, and a workplace performance expert who's going to let us in on some secrets around why being awkward and cringeworthy is actually like a superpower of sorts, which is something that is blowing my mind. So, Henna, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to blow your mind. That's my goal
Yes.
for the day.
Well, I've seen you in action, not only as a guest on other podcasts like Lauren Greif's Career Blast and a Half, which is where I originally learned of you. Shout out to Lauren, who's an amazing connector, and everybody should check out her show. But you were exceptional on that. And then that led me to purchasing your book and also watching you do your TEDx from years ago. And I just got to say, like, the way you bring this message forward is so powerful and so entertaining and so funny. And I just absolutely love it. So I'm psyched to have you here. So, I guess to kick off, for me, like when I think of the word awkward, I have only terrible associations with it. Of course, until I learned about your work. But to me, it's like, how could awkward ever be anything other than completely terrible? Which is, I'm assuming, what most people before they learn of you kind of feel about the concept of awkwardness.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I don't think there's many people who have carried that word with any sense of excitement historically. And what I really set out to do is to take it from this thing that we've dramatized, stigmatized, made, the worst thing in the world, and really examine it with a more objective and fact-based lens. So, to answer your question, let's start with this. It is a social emotion of discomfort. I do not want to pretend or promise anyone that after this conversation, they're going to think that this feels good. It doesn't actually feel good in the moment. It is a social emotion of discomfort. Social meaning it is an emotion of discomfort, but we don't tend to feel it when we're by ourselves. So if I'm sitting in my
Mm.
office and I mispronounce your last name, but no one heard me, we weren't even on this call yet. Might I kind of scold myself momentarily? Sure. But do I feel awkward or embarrassed about it? No, because
Mm-mm.
nobody saw me. It's that social bit when we tend to have it happen in front of other people that kicks up the discomfort. Now, how is it possibly a good thing? Well, ultimately, there is so much transition, challenge, change, uncertainty in the world right now. And anyone listening to this show, I'm going to guess, has at least some interest in their own personal and professional development. So, given all of that change and given all of that growth that we hunger towards, the truth is, at every inflection point of our lives, we have a very strong risk of that feeling of awkwardness when we're trying to grow, when we're trying to change, when the world is changing and we're trying to keep up, trying to learn how to use AI, we're trying to figure out how to do hybrid work, everything feels awkward. And the
So
truth is,
awkward.
we can't avoid it.
Mm-mm.
Awkwardness is a byproduct of uncertainty. And so by avoiding it, we're playing a game that no one can win. Instead, what we need to do is learn how to reframe our experience with it, understand what does the emotion actually mean, and to take it a full step further, actually get good at the feeling so we can start to pursue the things we actually want.
How did you I mean, that's so incredible, and you're right, I mean, we have no choice. We have to, embrace this change, we have to go with the awkwardness that comes with learning anything new, right? And we have to do it publicly, right? Because we most of us have to work for a living, right? So we have to do it alongside others. Did you have, like, some sort of an epiphany that this was a thing you needed to embrace? Like, tell me, what's the journey to getting to where you are today, where you're essentially, like, loudly proclaiming the value of awkwardness and how it's going to further our lives?
Yeah, I wish I could tell you that this was just something I read in a book, but I am, a story of someone who felt this way her whole life. So it's funny. People are like, you're a keynote speaker. You seem articulate. You seem confident. And I'm like, well, if you knew me just a few years ago, I'm a firstborn of immigrant parents. My mom is from Pakistan. My dad is from India. I was the first one in this country, American. So my
Wow.
clothes were different. My, hairstyle was different. My food smelled different. My name is Henna. I was born in the early 80s when Hanna Barbera was the thing. All I wanted was to be Jennifer or Jessica or
Oh, yeah.
Stephanie with a white
Mm.
bread peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And yet I had on, funny clothes and clothes that, or, food that was very aromatic in my lunchbox. And my entire adolescence felt like this story of just wanting to fit in when all of my bumpy edges insisted on sticking out. And it wasn't until really, I would say, college that I started to find a little bit of a sense of, okay, actually, there's other people with bumpy edges. And if we all have them sticking out and are just doing our own thing, then it's a little bit, not as a big deal. And you don't need to fit in over there because then you can find your people over here.
Right.
But then the reason it became a professional interest was, for those of us in professional personal development love world, we love our queen, Brené Brown, and she developed a tagline that she started to use at the end of her podcast. She would say, "Stay awkward, brave, and kind."
Oh.
That was one of her taglines, and I remember hearing that and thinking, "Okay, Queen Brené, I love you. Stay brave. Yes, got it.
Check.
Courage is
Mhm.
important. Stay kind. We need kindness in this world. Stay awkward?
You're like,
Like,
"What?"
what you know, white lady? Like, like you have no idea what this emotion has done to me, the grip it has had on me.
Oh,
And
man.
every time I hit a professional inflection point, it was like little Henna came rushing back. And
Oh.
so I heard her say, stay awkward. And it was like, no, no, on this, I don't agree with you. And it got me very curious about what does this emotion actually mean at work? And diving into the research, it was illuminating. I felt like I learned so
Wow.
much and started to think, do other people feel this way? Well, turns out they do.
Wow. That is such a cool story, and I love that you're sitting there like, "Wait, I'm buying everything you're selling, Brene, but
Yeah.
this I don't under."
Mm-mm.
Yeah, but you're right. It is something that is universal. I mean, I think it's one of the core tenets of being human that we want to belong. We're like tribal ingrained people. We want to be a part of the group. And so, I understand what you're saying when it comes to feeling othered and feeling like on the outside. And I know it's really hard to believe, but I was a huge nerd back in elementary school and no one wanted to be my friend. So I know what it's like to want to fit in, right? And to want to be a part of things. So I think that's a very human. I mean, who hasn't felt that way at some point, right? Um,
Yeah, I think
but I
I
love
think
that you
this is
got
gonna be the
curious.
the the human experience is to be awkward. Like, I think what you and I both agree on is despite how we felt and despite how common that feeling may have been in our life experience, here's a fun truth that people can just really let wash over them. Confident people don't get to avoid that feeling.
You're so
Their
right.
comeback rate is just faster.
Mm, yeah,
They don't avoid it. They feel it just as acutely when they put their foot in their mouth, when they say the wrong thing, when they trip over their own 2 feet. They don't neurotypical confident people don't get to avoid it. They've just learned to come back from it very quickly. But that's a skill we can all learn.
absolutely. And I'm thinking through, I'm an eldest child, eldest daughter, elder
Right?
millennial, right?
Yes.
And I too feel like I had this like very, very strong desire to fit in and this sense that I had to just keep on putting one foot in front of the other and climbing the corporate ladder and that, keep striving this ambitious, overachieving bent that I think you're speaking about too. It seems from what I've seen like pretty emblematic of people in our demographic, right? And it's something that for me, as I got older, I learned, like, maybe that's not all there is, right? And maybe I need to embrace, like you said, some of the bits that are a little bit outside of the confines, like drawing outside of the lines a little, and perhaps having a little bit more of an unconventional approach. And that's something that I think I only was able to embrace as I got older and gained the confidence essentially of just, like, having gotten through this thing called life, right? And so I think I'd love to talk a little bit about sort of where this intersection is between age and the ability to have this sort of mentality where you can survive and maybe even thrive with the awkwardness, right? And take it forward and make it something that can actually help you, right? Like how does
Mhm.
age play into that?
Yeah, age is such an interesting part of this conversation. So what shook out in the research is awkwardness or embarrassment or cringe, which are 3 different things but related to one another. They're all social emotions of discomfort. It's interesting, they're all considered self-conscious emotions. A self-conscious emotion is essentially, you know, who we are based on what other people see. Like, what do we think other people see? And so the research found that most again, neurotypical children don't develop really the strong degree of self-consciousness until early adolescence. So around age 8 or 9. So we're going to start with, was this something we were born with? No, we didn't come out of the womb caring what other people thought of us or worrying about what other people thought of us or even acknowledging that other people were thinking anything about us. Those were not natural within us. So studies of the past have said 8 or 9. Again, I don't have the data to support this, but I'm going to guess just with technology that the age beginning of that has probably gone down. It's probably
Yeah,
starting even younger than
I
it
bet.
used to. But it wasn't around until around that age that we as humans started to develop this. Oh, other people are watching me.
Hmm.
So think of the toddlers in your life, whether they're your children, your neighbors, your nieces, whoever it may be, that are dancing around the kitchen with reckless abandon,
Yeah.
sometimes wearing pants, sometimes not, right?
Pants
Singing at the
optional.
top of their lungs. They don't care who's looking. They don't
Mm-mm.
care if they're doing it right or what we think of it. They're just doing it for the pure experience of it, for the joy of it. But around age 8 or 9, we start to think of, okay, there are things that are considered socially acceptable. There are things that my friends, my peers, my parents, my, relatives say, "Oh, we don't do that," or "This is the right way to be." We start to acknowledge social norms, and we start to live our lives based on those social norms. No longer, "This feels good to me, I just am enjoying myself," but rather, "Is this socially palatable to the masses?" Which is, again, not in itself a bad thing. We are tribal creatures who want to belong, but it can become a bad thing when we start to live our lives solely through that lens. What will
Yeah.
other people think? Do they like what they see? Does this feel socially palatable? And so those late adolescent years, kind of teens into potentially college years, early 20s, we can put a little too much stock in
Mhm.
that kind of over index on social palatability. And it's usually not until, mid to late 30s and into our 40s that we start to realize, oh, guess what? People aren't watching us nearly as closely as we think they are. And we start to kind of regain that childlike sense of self, that beginner mindset again.
Oh, that is so cool. I feel like I have absolutely walked the path you just described, and I'm sure that obviously the research says I'm not unique, right? So I think it's something that I really hope people absorb because getting older can be an incredible gift, right? Because
Oh,
you
such a
do
gift.
shed that. It's like aging is living, right? And like the
Yeah.
longer we go on, the more we know ourselves, the more we trust ourselves to do things that will actually pan out for us, right? Because 'Cause we've gotten this far, and I just think that's a really beautiful story, right? Like, we are born without this sort of narrative that we have to fit into a box, and somehow it seems like we break free over time of that. I hope we can somehow figure out how to imbue one's, full life with that sense of like, "Hey, we can go for it, and we don't have to be worried about what everybody is thinking." But I wonder how we can break through on that. Maybe your work is gonna help us get there, which would be amazing.
Yeah.
Imagine where we'd be, right? Imagine where we'd
I mean,
be.
the research supports it. One of the
So
most
cool.
popular lines from my keynote on this is, in our 20s and 30s, we care a lot about what other people think of us. And in our 40s and 50s, we stop caring what other people think of us. But in our 60s and 70s, we realize they were never thinking that hard about us in the first place. And
So
that
true.
knowledge is so freeing.
It
They
really
never were, not
is.
even in
They
our 20s
never
and 30s.
were. They never were. You're so right. It's been something that I've found to be hugely liberating, and I'm grateful that it took me, until my 40s, I guess, rather than my 60s, 70s to realize that because the spotlight effect it's real, right?
Yeah.
Like no one
Yes.
no one cares about you the way you care about you, and instead of being depressed about that, let's celebrate it.
Yeah, we can absolutely discover that far sooner than our 60s and
Yes.
70s, but it takes the intentionality that you've found
Mhm.
for yourself, which is, I'm gonna believe this to be true and start to make some choices in my life that reflect that truth.
Absolutely. I mean, I just think that's so huge. So, I think, getting back to the concept of age, right? I think age can add a certain amount of awkwardness, both in society, just in general everyday interactions, as well as, of course, in the workplace, which is, the subject of this particular podcast, right? So I wonder what you've uncovered from just your own personal experience as well as from your research around sort of the way age intersects with this awkwardness and how that comes to bear in like everyday interactions or workplace, management structures, for example, like a much older manager or a much younger manager and that sort of thing.
Yeah, what we're discovering, so our research study, which I'll send you the link for the show notes. It's going to be at prioritygroup.com/study. You can download the white paper, but we set out to study the state of social muscles in the workplace. And what I was most curious about learning was not just, are we lonely at work? Do we have a best friend at work? I think there's plenty of studies that have talked about that in recent months. What I wanted to know is, what are some of the bigger downstream consequences of not having social muscle strength at work, and instead the reverse, which is social muscle atrophy? And also, we were curious to know, how did this cut, across different generations and demographics? So let's start with, before we even get into the data, let's start with a little bit of a truth. For the first time in history, we have 5 generations currently working in the workforce who have grown up very differently from one another. So I, like you, I'm an elder millennial. I'll be 43 in a few weeks. Right now we've got baby boomers that are managing Gen Z employees, and they have come up with social skill that has looked very different. So if you think about, previous generations, social negotiation was something that was very much built into childhood structures for baby boomers. So this is a generation, I would say up through my generation, where we grew up, playing with our friends on the street. And we made up rules like, okay, you're in charge, and this is what you're going to do, and this is what you're going to do. And then halfway through the game, it was like, no, you're not in charge of that anymore. Now you're going to do this. We would have a conflict. We would resolve the conflict. This was what we learned physically on the streets, this art of social negotiation, of hierarchy, of problem solving, of conflict resolution. Today's generation did not, again, to no fault of their own,
Mm-mm.
grow up playing these sort of social games on the street. Their form of social interaction has just been very different. Now, for them, I do not fault them. One of the things I am very big to talk about when discussing generations in the workplace is, this is the story I always tell. My daughter is almost 15. She's in high school. So again, she's not in the workforce, but she's Gen Z. And I used to say things to her. She has a cell phone. It would be in her hand, be stuck in her hand. And I would say things to her like, Layla, sweetie, that thing didn't even exist when I was your age. I didn't even have one of those when I was your age. And of course, did that work? No, of course not. Because not only is she thinking to herself, mom doesn't get me, but it actually goes a step further than that. In that moment, the next thought in her mind is, I can't help when I was born. I can't help when I was born. And therefore, any social connection, any communication that occurs after that is like it's hitting a wall, because she's decided that nothing in that comes after it is worth listening to, because I'm holding her against something that she can't control.
So true.
Same thing applies to every generation in the workforce. They can't help when they were born.
Mm-mm.
A baby boomer can't help that they didn't grow up with all this technology, the same way a Gen Z person can't help that they did. And so when it
Mhm.
comes to social strength in the workplace, what we have to start to acknowledge is that we all have very different lived experiences, and we have to find ways to bridge the gap. So some of the most interesting stuff that came out of this was something like 51% of working Americans that classify as millennials called workplace relationships superficial.
Oh, really?
44% of
51%?
all working Americans, but 51% of millennials in particular labeled workplace relationships as superficial.
Wow.
That translates to millions of us
Yeah.
across working America. So, what does that tell us? That tells us that we're essentially unwilling to have the types of conversations that deeply connect us. We are so worried about bothering people
Yeah.
that we don't connect at the level that we should. We stay at the surface because, what if I ask them something and they don't want to answer me? Then it feels awkward. Our discomfort tolerance is so low. Our awkward tolerance is so low that we stay at the surface. So again, 51% of millennials is a huge number, but it's 44% of all working Americans.
Wow.
Again, millions of us cannot tolerate the awkwardness of not knowing how it's going to go. So instead,
Right.
we stay superficial, which I think has huge consequences to our collaboration, our teamwork, and everything else.
100%. Yeah, that's actually a really gutting statistic. I'm really,
Yeah.
really bummed out because I think of all the incredible connections that I've made throughout the course of my career and how real those relationships are. And it breaks my heart to
Mhm.
think that that's not the case for everybody, right? And that we
Yeah.
might even be, for whatever reason, maybe partially due to who knows the pandemic, like we're moving away from that
Yeah.
and into more of like a superficial state. I want to drill down on the social fluency aspect because let me tell you,
Yeah.
I think I'm a little bit more awkward than I was pre-pandemic, and I
Oh, for
wonder,
sure.
am I
Yeah, we
yeah,
all
I'm
are.
like, "Ugh." Like, I'm a huge extrovert, I'm a big connector, I'm a people person through and through, but I feel like even lately when I've gone to networking events and whatnot, I just feel like a little out of step, and I'm like, "Did I become more introverted during the pandemic? Is this, like, my am I actually an ambivert? Am I growing? Like, what's going on? Or am I just more awkward because I haven't been doing this? Am I out of practice? Have my muscles atrophied?" I just want to hear a little bit what you have to say around the aspect of the impact of the pandemic on maybe all of us, but certainly like you suggested in the last bit there. I mean, there are some generations who have not been able to be in person, right? And that can only I can only imagine what that's done to their abilities socially, right?
Yeah, your instincts on this are exactly right. So, yes, our personality preferences as far as introversion, extroversion, or somewhere on the scale can evolve over time. But for many of us, what we are finding is it is exactly what you mentioned, which is a lack of practice. It is a muscle that has atrophied because the systems in our world now are set up where we don't have to. So these things were building before the pandemic with technology, with Slack, with video conferencing starting to take hold. We weren't having the same level of in-person connection. Now, again, can we develop deep relationships on Zoom? Absolutely. Some of my best friends at work, some of my deepest relationships, some of the people most important to me don't live near me. We
Mm,
have
yeah,
developed
same.
relationships over virtual channels. That said, that requires a different level of design and dimensional attention, which is something we talk about in the keynote on this
Hmm,
topic, but it is not something that is automatic. You don't get the same water cooler chat, bump into each other connection that
yeah.
occurs in proximity, nor do you get that sort of baked in conflict that comes from being in proximity to others. When we're next to each other, we bump into each other, we trip on each other, we say the wrong thing, and someone can hear it, right? There's a lot of that we become almost required to resolve in an in person setting that gets a little bit tucked away and smoothed away in a virtual setting. So we do know that it is a practice issue because, again, before the pandemic, researchers studied astronauts, polar explorers, prisoners, people who were isolated and solitary by virtue of their condition or their job. And they found that when those people came back from space, came back from their polar expedition, came back from prison, that their ability to read and communicate and connect with other humans was reduced. They lost practice, they lost muscle, and we all felt that after the pandemic. Again, Maureen, like you, I'm an extrovert. I don't identify as an introvert, but you remember that first meeting when we came back and saw people for the first time and we were like, "What is your face? Are you mad at me? Are we hugging? Are we fist bump?" Like, I'm trying to read the look on your face and I can't figure it out. I
Oh
used to know
my
how to do this,
gosh. Yes,
right?
that's so
You
true.
remember.
I do.
It
Like it
felt
was
so
yesterday.
clunky. So
It really
now we
did.
all got to experience this proof point of how social cue reading, gesture reading skills can atrophy. And it took us all a minute to get back
Mhm.
to, okay, wait, this is how you read people? Like I
Yeah.
jokingly say, I forgot how to people.
No, it's
I totally
true.
forgot how to people. So today, we just have less
Man.
chances for meaningful social interaction. So,
Yeah.
yes, there is less practice. Add to that technology, add to that decentralized workforces, add to that post
Mhm.
pandemic comfort zone. So, another
PTSD.
statistic, oh, PTSD. Another statistic that shook me that came out of our study was that despite 56% of working Americans know that working as a group or working as a team is important to social muscle strength, yet 86%, I think it was, of working Americans prefer to work alone
Wow.
versus with a team on
Wow.
a project. What does this
Interesting.
tell us? This tells us that we got real comfy cozy
Yeah.
with working on our own, working in a silo,
Mm.
and we would rather brainstorm with our friend Chatty G than actually call. a real person up, right?
ChatGPT.
This is what we've gotten to. And it's not that there's not
Mm,
value. ChatGPT gives me great
mm,
advice sometimes, but it's never going to be the same as someone who knows me, who
no.
says, "Okay, you know what? I know that like this was something that came up, but have you ever considered X?" Right? There's still value to that, and we need to not get so comfortable in our solo work that we start to diminish the value of what it means to actually collaborate and move as one.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry I have to take ChatGPT from this conversation. That's coming. I love it. I think you should trademark it. ChatGPT.
Oh,
Yeah.
I heard it from someone. Don't give me
Is
too much
good.
credit.
It is good. I love it. So, okay, yeah, we've got a lot to contend with. We have the PTSD from the pandemic, we have generational norms, we have the advent of the cell phone, which, I will tell you when I got mine, I wanna be honest, like, I swear my social abilities, my social network, everything just, like, tanked because we're all so absorbed in it, right? And I remember I used to have these epic email chains with my best friends from college, and we would share all that was going on in our lives, and then, even
Yeah.
just, like, social media, it was like, "Oh, no," instead of, like, a whole email about the vacation that we had that we wanted to share with our best friends, it's actually just gonna be an
Mhm.
album on Facebook now, and I was like, "Wait, this sucks." Like,
This
like,
doesn't feel
I'm
the
the same as
same.
all your
Yeah.
friends, this is different, right? So, that
Yeah.
and, like, the sort of dopamine rush of, like, this distraction device, right? Like, it's really
Yeah.
pulling us away from these human connections, but I wanna get into some of the ways that people can take these moments and these interactions and the inherent awkwardness involved in, like, taking a chance, right? Whether that's, like, speaking up in a meeting or going it alone and hanging a shingle to do something, outside of corporate or whatever it may be, and learn from you and the research you've done on, like, how we can, like, create a balm to make that a little bit easier for us and what sort of growth is possible on the other side of embracing awkward.
Yeah. I think, if I could make one plea is when it comes to social muscle strength, and when it comes to embracing awkward, I really want you to think of it like any other muscle. So when you think about physical muscle, would you go to the gym and pick up a 200-pound barbell if you've never been in there before? I hope not. You're going to hurt yourself
Yeah.
and you will never want to do it again. The same thing comes to when it comes to risk taking at work or to social strength, it needs to be in bite sized doses. So if you are someone who is trying to speak up in meetings and you're trying to practice raising your hand in those settings and it currently makes you wildly uncomfortable, please don't do it for the first time at your company's, all hands where all 500 people are in attendance, right? Start small,
I love that.
like slow stakes, like 3 of your colleagues who you trust, who you know have your best interests at heart. Could you suggest a slightly spicy idea with that group first? Can you get used to the sound of your own voice? Can you get used to the feeling of raising your own hand? These are things that require muscle building in slow, the slow is sustainable. Slow is how you grow. You are not going to do it when you take a leap. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes the leap is helpful, but if the idea of the leap is causing you to freeze, then I wanna encourage you to just shrink it down, like narrow the aperture. What is the small step that you can take? When it comes to awkwardness in particular, sometimes that emotion happens in planned moments, meaning I'm raising my hand, I'm not sure how it's gonna go, this feels like a risk. The reality is often that emotion exists in unplanned moments, right? I thought they were gonna love this, and they sure didn't, and now I have to deal with that.
Yeah,
So, we talked about comeback rate. Have some strategies that you practice often when it comes to your comeback rate. When it comes to awkwardness, chapter 8 is all about this. Use humor strategically, right? Self-deprecating humor can be powerful when used correctly, right? Don't punch down on your skill set if you're trying to suggest an idea and it's in your area of expertise. I don't want you to be self-deprecating about that. But let's say that
such a
you
good point.
mispronounce a name, human. It happens to all of us. And
Yeah.
you might say, it's a good thing I know more about her resume than I do about pronouncing names. Sorry about that. I'll work on that. These moments can do a lot to connect us and humanize us. So have strategies on the ready for when things inevitably go sideways because they will. They always do.
Absolutely. I mean, there's just you can't plan everything for sure. So having like a backup on how can I deal with this is so smart. And one thing that I picked up in your book that I thought was so brilliant was the very fact that we don't like it when people are perfect. Like it's actually intimidating, right? And so when you are more human, you are thereby more likable and therefore more likely to have success because people are going to buy from people they like. People are going to promote people they like, right? And so when you lean into your humanity, it can only help you in that way, right? Now, certainly there are some circumstances in which taking a risk at work can be really perilous, and it's understandable why people shy away from it. So, I guess,
Yes.
do you have any advice for people who, right now, particularly with just this complete layoff boom where things are feeling really tenuous with the advent of AI and whatnot? How can you advise people who are struggling with, like, "Oh, I wanna take the next step in my career," or, "I wanna do something new, and it's definitely gonna be awkward, but how can I fight through it and just do it anyway?" Do you have any advice for that?
Yes. Yeah. Not every risk needs to be taken, right? I
Yeah,
just want to be very
that
clear. I think
is true.
sometimes people hear me and they think, "Oh,
Calculated.
she's just like a risk taker left and right." No, I'm not reckless, right? I think first of all, risks that you take should reveal what you value.
Mhm.
So if there's something that is important to you, then when you think about risk taking, they should be aligned in directional, right? In the direction of something that's important to you. We're not just doing this for risk taking sake, just to say that we're doing it. I think the second thing is have a sort of mental and social parachute. Don't nobody is telling you to just jump without a plan. Simone Biles, even when she does her crazy flips off of the vault, she's not just like throwing herself in the air going fingers crossed, like let's see. No, she's got a plan of what she's going to do when she gets up there, how she's going to land. Does it always go exactly how she hoped? More often than not because
Mm,
of her
for
practice it
her.
does, but
Yeah.
sometimes it sure doesn't. But
Mhm.
it's always with this readiness and this preparation for if this doesn't go the way I hope it will, what do I do next, right? Or how do I prepare to try to improve the likelihood of the outcome? Not every risk needs to be taken. In the book, I call it the cringe chasm, right? Not every cringe chasm needs to be jumped, but every time you're at that crossroads, like, again, you're standing at the precipice of the cringe chasm, your stomach is in a knot, there's something you want to do, you see your future on the other side, just that recognition that jumping is a choice and not jumping is a choice. You're making a choice either way, so you kind of have to decide which one wins in this moment. Is the identity of the person I want to be going to be stronger today? Or is the comfort of not feeling, this knot in my belly going to win today? But force yourself to articulate that choice out loud. It becomes a little bit easier when you hear yourself say it. Like, I'm choosing this instead of this. It can give us the little nudge we need to jump if that's what we feel called to do.
That's beautiful, and it takes the power back, right? It gives us
Mhm.
agency in our own lives, which I love. Speaking of which, I wanna hear about how you crossed the cringe chasm to go from your corporate career to what you're doing now.
Oh god, I wish I could tell you that it was like, "Ah, I knew I wanted to do it and then I did it." No, it was not like that. I was at my previous job, for 14 years. I say this with
Oh, wow.
humility and gratitude. I was very good at it. I was there pre-pandemic, and at the time, I was working from home 4 days a week. I was only in the office once a week. I had a flexible schedule. My children were pretty young still. So on paper,
Check, check,
eh,
check. Brilliant.
check, check, check.
Yeah.
My friends were like, "Why would you ever consider leaving?" Right? This was again
Hold
before
on to
COVID, so
that for
not
dear life.
everyone was
Yeah,
working from home. So I had
yeah.
the dream gig, and at that point I had earned enough tenure that I could kind of work my own schedule. I could be there for my kids whenever they needed me. It was very difficult to
Mm,
consider leaving such a good setup.
I
But for
bet.
about 2 years, I had a voice in my mind and in my gut that would not shut up that was like, "Henna, you are destined for something more than this. You have more to offer. You've outgrown this." But the fear of what will other people think? I have the perfect job on paper. The fear of will I be any good at this? At this point, again, I'm just going to be very vulnerable and honest here. I had built an identity around Henna, the top performer at my previous firm.
Oh, yeah.
And if I left that job, then who was
Then
I?
who am I? Right.
I
It's so
and
relatable.
In truth, there was, like, a little bit of an identity crisis when I left the
Oh.
job because I was so entrenched with that version who was successful and knew what she was doing,
Mm.
and so I really had to sit with a lot of my own mindset work, my own self-talk around, "Hannah, trust yourself. This feeling you're feeling is healthy self-doubt." So I talk about this in the book. Sometimes we feel awkward and we think, "Oh, this self-doubt is not a good feeling. I don't like it." There is a big difference between healthy self-doubt and unhealthy self-doubt. Unhealthy self-doubt makes you freeze, it makes you not take action on anything. Healthy self-doubt is completely normal anytime you're doing something new, and typically it helps you prepare harder, read more books, network with more people, learn more about the space that you're looking to enter. So I was feeling a lot of healthy self-doubt, and I doubled down on all of those things, and guess what? That's what you do
Yep,
when you
and it makes you
feel
successful.
awkward about something new.
Yeah,
Yep,
yeah,
exactly. So one step at a time, but, feel the feeling. Feel the feeling, do it awkward, but do it
yeah.
anyway.
I love that. I love that,
Mm,
and I think, a lot of people are going to be leaving situations that weren't necessarily perfect, so hopefully that will
right.
help them on their way a
Ah,
little bit more quickly, but I can
yeah.
only imagine what it was like for you leaving this thing that seemed so beautiful, right, and was actually fulfilling for you, but having this sort of gnawing sense at your core, like, there's more than this, and going for it, and I have to, like, take my hat off to you for following it because that had to have been extraordinarily difficult, and I'm sure you had a lot of fits and starts because though you look at your website today, Henna, and you look like just this freaking superstar, I'm sure you
Mm,
weren't that
mm.
immediately, and it takes
God, no.
time, right? And there's
No.
no such thing as an overnight success, and you have to build it
No.
piece by piece, and it's painful. And I mean, I can tell you from even starting this whole podcast and creating a platform, it's been painful and difficult and pains. I've almost quit a million times. Let's just be real.
I'm sure you have.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's seeing people like you who didn't quit and who kept going and pursuing the thing that they believed in that makes people like me wanna go, right? And continue. And so I love the story of you leaving sort of the safe harbor of what you'd built in corporate and doing this because I think you're going to have a much wider impact than you would have in corporate, and you're gonna be feeding your soul in a way that you wouldn't have at your old job, right? So I think
Well, I
that's just, like,
appreciate that, and
tremendous. It's
I'm
true.
glad you've kept going with the
It's
podcast as well, and I think the one thing that you said that really struck me is so many people hear, it's I'm successful or I'm not, or
mm,
I'm gonna make a go of this or I'm not, or I'm gonna quit or I'm not. And one thing that I think most people don't give themselves nearly enough credit for is their ability to adjust as they go. So one of the exercises that I used to have my coaching clients do was, okay, so you do this thing that scares the pants off of you. Now let's spend 5 minutes and let's catastrophize.
oh, I
Let's
love
just take this
this.
thing to its worst case scenario. You start your own business, takes you forever to get your first couple clients. You're not bringing in any money. You have to move out of your house. You're now moving in with your parents. Your parents are feeding you. You're like, oh, this sucks. Your parents are like, that's enough. You've been mooching off of us long enough. You now move into a homeless shelter. Now you've been in that homeless shelter for a while. And then I kind of just like stop them and I'm like, okay, be honest with me. Answer this question honestly. How long until you're running that homeless shelter?
Love that.
And most people are like, okay, I get the
Mhm.
point. Yeah, I'd be running that stuff the next day. And I'm like, you hear how ridiculous it sounds because you would
Mhm.
never get to that point. You would make
Mm-mm.
little adjustments
You would.
along the way. If it wasn't working out, corporate is always there. If it wasn't working out with the niche that you started in, you can pick a new one. I started executive coaching full time. I do very little now. It was a series of little adjustments over the last 5 years that got to today. And I hope we talk again, Maureen, in 2 years. And you're like, wow, you're doing something totally different. Probably, probably. But
That's
that's
such a strong
where
point.
the freedom lies.
Ugh, I love that message so much. I mean, more than you could just wow, it's so perfectly resonant. And I mean, we have to have that faith in ourselves. And I think so often, first of all, I got to say, I love the catastrophizing concept, right? Because you're right. Like the worst case scenario and building back from that is such a really good exercise for people to do because in all likelihood, you're not going to hit that, right? Because like you said, you're going to kind of peel back, you're going to learn, you're going to do like some iteration, right? But also, like, we don't often allow ourselves to go on the flip side and think, what if it all works out? And
Yeah.
sometimes it
Yeah.
freaking works out. And we need to see
Absolutely.
both of those things and allow for both of those possibilities in order to
Yeah.
realize what we should, right? And I feel so emboldened and excited about the next few, hopefully all the decades, hopefully there are plenty of them in my life and in the lives of those that I know and care about and everyone, frankly, because we do have that ability to grow and shift and change and alter course when need be. And so I think that there's just like so much possibility. And, whether that's corporate, whether that's your own thing, whether that's whatever it might be, a project, like there are so many ways that your life can kind of just arc out. And one of my favorite sayings
Mhm.
is I've lost touch with several people who I used to be, and I don't know actually who said it
Mm,
originally, but I love it because
I
I'm like,
love
"Oh
that.
my gosh, I have lived so many different sort of eras and been so many different people ultimately," and I'm kind of excited when I think about that because 'cause I'm like, "I don't even know the people who I will be yet." Like, I'm gonna meet them. Isn't that cool?
Mm.
Like,
I love that. Well,
I
can you say
nerd
that
out on that.
again? I've lost touch with the different what was it?
I've lost touch with several people who I used to be, and
Oh, I
then
love
I do the
that so
flip
much.
side. I do too. I've gotta find out who the person is who actually said it. It's probably on, like, quotes.com or something, and who
Yeah.
knows if it's actually accurate. Who knows, what is
Yeah.
truth anymore? But, at this point, it's like, I also see the flip of that. Like, I don't even know the people that I'm gonna be, and then you can expand
Mhm.
beyond that, the people I'm gonna meet, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
so exciting when you look at life through that lens, and I think we need to try and adopt that mindset a little bit more because I think we'll all grow from that. I'm just so excited about the work you do, and I mean,
Well,
I
thank
wanna
you.
make sure in the show notes, I'm going to link not only your book, which is excellent, I'm partway through it, I wish I'd been able to finish it. Oh gosh, but I love it, and your speeches are fantastic. So
Thank
we'll
you.
link all those things in the show notes as well as your new study, which I'm really excited about diving into. And
Yeah.
thank you for giving me a little taste of it because it sounds like it has
Yes.
incredible impact. And just love the work you're doing and really hope that all of
Thank
us can
you.
embrace our awkward and just go for it because why not? What's the worst that could happen, right?
No, I appreciate it. No, thank you for having me. Thank you for making space for this conversation. I think some of the things that are difficult to talk about are the ones that move the needle the most. And the more awareness we can bring to how do we get in our own way? How do the structures and systems we live in, stand in the way of our goals, of our development? I think the more airtime we can give to these things, the more it normalizes these feelings for the rest of us. And normalization of stuff that is a shared experience, in my opinion, goes such a long way today. So thank you for making space for the conversation.
Absolutely. Fully agree. Thank you so much, Hannah.